Welcome to the Dad Lit Pod, the literary podcast for people who will let you leave the house like that over their dead body. Today's guest is Thomas Trang. Thomas is a French Vietnamese writer currently living in the UK after stints in Australia, New York, and Singapore. His stories have previously appeared in Future Quake, Full House Literary, and the Revolutions 2 anthology. He's currently working on a sci fi trilogy which mixes cyberpunk with the gritty realpolitik of The Wire and Cold War spy fiction. His debut novel, Dark Neon and Dirt, from publisher Shotgun Honey, is a thriller reminiscent of Michael Mann's Heat about a high end jewel thief and the cop who's hunting him, all set against the backdrop of modern Los Angeles. And that is very recently out, and I have read it, and it is very reminiscent of Heat. It's a terrific book. Uh, the language in it is very efficient and very clear and very creates an aura of suspense that I really liked. In addition to having great dialogue and just in general a good twisted story that is just fun. So thank you for the book and thank you for joining me on the Dadlit Pod.
Hi, Dan. Thank you. Thank you for the very kind words. And I'm happy to be here to talk about all things crime fiction and all things dad. I'm a bit shell-shocked. Speaking of dad stuff, we have had, well, it was my daughter's 13th birthday a couple of days ago. So we've had a sleepover with her and five of her friends, I think.
Oh, jeez.
So I've just taken them home because it's Mother's Day here, so I've dropped them at home so they can terrorize their own mothers instead of my wife. And so yeah, I'm a little bit shell shocked, but let's go. So
Yes.
yeah, just jumping straight into the dad stuff, I suppose.
Yeah, my daughter woke me up at 6 a.m. this morning to tell me that she wanted to go on a treasure hunt.
Oh,
So I don't know what that's going to look like, but apparently that's going to happen today.
oh well, good luck with that. Now, yeah, like I said, my daughter's 13, so it's more a case of I have to go and wake her up. She's very much leaning into that moody teenager phase.
Yeah, that lazy teen phase.
Yeah.
Yes. So the book's been out for a week,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how's it going?
It's been good. I mean, it is very early days in terms of the book being out. So I am a little bit in that limbo phase of it's come out. Obviously, it's had some really positive reactions, but as you know, these things do take some time. Reviews are starting to come in. They've been very positive so far, and I'm just getting feedback from messages here and there, emails, messages online, and yeah, people are really enjoying it. I think you mentioned Heat, and I think we spoke about it offline. It was very much a I want to do my version of Heat because
Yeah.
speaking of all things dad, Heat is obviously up there on the Mount Rushmore of dad things, and Michael Mann in general is very much a dad sort of figurehead, I suppose. Um, and obviously Heat 2 as well, which came out, I want to say maybe 2 years ago now. Um,
Mhm.
that obviously I'd written my book before that. Otherwise, I'd probably still be trying to finish the thing because, when one of your, I don't think it's unfair to say that, Michael Mann is a huge influence and an idol of sorts in terms of the storytelling that he does and the characters that he creates and the world that he creates in his films. Um, you have that agony of influence thing where you just, oh no, well he's done this, so I've got to do this. And so thankfully I'd written the end on my book and it was very much done. So yes, Heat was obviously a huge influence. I mean, if you've read the book, you'll certainly recognize it definitely starts in the same place. I mean, it literally starts with an armored truck robbery. The results are very different to what we see in Heat, but yes, you have a thief and you have a dogged policeman on his trail, and that's that's the starting point. But I like to think that the characters are very different. They move differently, so obviously the story starts to go in different places. when I was putting it together, and then it is quite twisty, but it's fun as well. I mean, you've mentioned that, a couple of other people have mentioned that it is it does deal with some dark things, but it is also a fun hang, as they say.
And a very strong sense of place. You get a real tour of Los Angeles reading the
Yeah,
book.
that was very much intentional. I'm not from Los Angeles. I have some family that are around Los Angeles, but most of my family in the US are based around the Bay Area now. But I have visited Los Angeles many, many years ago now. Um, but I think again we spoke about this offline. Los Angeles, if you're of a certain age, I guess certainly if you're in your 40s now and you've grown up with the films of Hollywood, US TV. I mean, Los Angeles is almost mythical in the way, certainly in my mind, in the way that it is in my head. Um, and so I very much wanted to lean into that. But again, when you're writing a book, you need to do a lot of research and just make sure you get things right. And I was quite lucky that the editor at Shotgun Honey, she is based in, I'm not sure if she's in Los Angeles proper, but she's definitely around Southern California. So she was very good in terms of double checking certain things. Oh no, if you were moving from X to Y, you would go down this street, not that street. And oh, actually, that street's one way. So that sort of thing kept me honest because I know that a lot of people will read it and that sort of thing will pass them by. But then again, you never know who's going to read it, and some people are real sticklers for getting things right, and I definitely wanted to make sure that it all lined up. So I say that to say any mistakes in there are mine and not hers.
I'm thinking of instances where that's happened. I grew up personally in the state of Maine,
Mm,
and one of my favorite things is we have a very specific accent in Maine.
mm, mm,
It is unmistakable, and if you're from there, you tend to have reminiscent elements of the
mm,
accent. And whenever they make a Stephen King movie and they set anything in Maine, they
mm.
always have this bizarre, like weird. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like because ultimately it's sort of a drawl version of the Boston accent that
I
you
was going to
see in
say,
The
I
Departed.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's a drawn out drawl version of that sort of Boston accent. And for some reason they play it as like part Alabama, part Midwest, part I just got hit in the head with a rock, you know? And it always drives me crazy and it takes me out of it very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge because, as you may have noticed, I do not have an American accent.
Yeah.
And my understanding of the US and accents is it was very basic until quite recently. I figured there's an American accent at a stretch. There's like a hillbilly slash foghorn leghorn stereotypical accent, and
Yeah.
then there's the Mark Wahlberg Boston accent, and then everything else is the same. Now I'm learning. No, there's like a distinct Chicago accent. I mean, if you
Hmm.
listen to any interview with Michael Mann, I mean, he's Chicago through and through.
Yes.
Um, but on the page, it's not a problem. For me now, I'm starting to do readings and so forth. And the problem I face is that my my book has a lot of dialogue in it, and I'm not one to try and imitate accents.
Yeah.
But then when I start reading that, and it's written in a very American vernacular
Yes.
because
It,
it's
it, it really, it, you would not think that it was anything but an American vernacular. The dialogue is all very set in American colloquial speech, and it
mm,
comes off really well. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you hear me talk and it's like a mix between Australian and the Queen of England or whatever, reading that dialogue, it can be a bit jarring. So my solution has been to pick the bits that have a limited amount of dialogue as well. And I mean, some of the dialogue you can get away with a fairly neutral accent, but then when people are really going for it with, with the heightened uh, speech
Yes.
without the accent, it does come off, very, very strange.
I'm dealing with this. I have a work that I'm interested in writing, and I've outlined it out, and I want to set it with a British protagonist. It's
Mm,
the plan is for sort of a horror novel
right.
with a British protagonist who's spent time in Northern Ireland, and then subsequently after that has veteran elements to that experience. And the book is to sort of talk about the challenge. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie House.
Oh, years ago. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Basically to do sort of a house style story, but with a British veteran from the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And the one
Wow.
thing that I'm very hesitant about doing it is that the British colloquialisms, and I want to set it in the early 1990s, around the time that the Channel comes online,
Yes.
is that the British colloquialisms, I don't know what I would do to familiarize myself with them. And I had a very good friend who served in Northern Ireland with the British paratroopers,
Right.
and so I have I have his experience, but I feel like the dialogue would be almost foreign to me, and I'd hate to do it incorrectly. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's that famous quote by Oscar Wilde. He says the UK or Britain and America is two countries separated by a common language, and it is very true. And I've actually read some books where they've done exactly that. They have a British character who talks in this heightened Cockney accent, or tries to use the rhyming slang or say certain things that are is peculiarly British. I mean, there's one instance. I won't name the book, but it was a British character, and they kept saying, "Oh, yeah," instead of taking the piss, which just means I'm not even sure how you'd say that. Just
Screwing with a person or giving a person a hard time.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, you're taking the piss. Oh, how much? Oh, you're taking the piss. I'm not paying that. And the character kept saying taking a piss, which is a very which means the same thing here that it does over there. So
Yes.
it happened on multiple occasions, and it was, yeah. I mean, that sort of thing throws you out. So I was very careful and conscious of that when I was writing a book set in America. But again, I could have made my life easier and set it in Europe, or set it, somewhere where I had more direct day-to-day experience. But
Yeah.
as I said, it was that Los Angeles slash Hollywood type of mythical thing. There was never a doubt in my mind that when I decided I'm going to write this crime novel, and obviously it was very much influenced by Heat and other Michael Mann things as well.
Mhm.
There was never any doubt that it was going to be set in Los Angeles. So y it's like anything else. You just have to do the work and
Yeah.
redraft. I'm a constant. I mean, I'm a slow writer anyway, but I would still be redrafting it if it wasn't, well, now it's published, it's out of my hands. But I think up into the last minute, I was changing little bits here and there, and I can make this a little bit better. And the publishers had to say, "Hey, look, stop. We've got to get it out, or we've got to get it into a final print, and then you get one last chance to look at it, and then we're off." Um, but yeah, I think it did come out well. It was one of those things where I'd written it, rewritten it, and worked on it, and you'll know with anything of your own, at a certain point you get absolutely sick of it.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then I thought, well, I'm not even looking at this objectively anymore because I'm reading it and it's just, the words are sort of blurring in my mind. But towards the end, I sort of came full circle and started to read it almost with not quite fresh eyes because you never really get to read your own books for the first time. But I started to appreciate, oh, no, actually, this is pretty good. So, luckily that was, right at the time that was about to be released. So, that was very good timing.
Yeah, so I too have this problem. And then I read about Robert Henlon's rules of writing.
Mm,
And one of his rules is only edit to editorial demand.
right. Yeah.
And I thought that that was incredibly helpful for me to break out of how, you know, this can always be better and I can always change this because I'd end up going and changing paragraphs and then the next paragraph, oh, this paragraph starts with the same word.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. You,
so,
you you do end up chasing your tail and
yeah,
it
yeah,
gets and it gets really silly.
you just end up chasing your tail. So I consciously instituted that. And the first thing I do is when I finish a manuscript, I hand it off to my wife to read it.
Okay.
And I know you and I were talking, and your wife has only just read your book,
She, yes.
which I
Yeah.
found very surprising because it would be very difficult for me to get away with publishing something without my wife giving her
Well,
stern review.
yeah, I'd written it and I think she'd read a couple of chapters here and there. And she did offer some feedback at the time, some of which I instituted, some of which I didn't. But when I had the paperback version sent to me finally, she did pick it up and start reading it. And it wasn't really until then that I realized, oh, this is quite nerve-wracking. I hope she likes it because she doesn't read a lot of crime fiction. That's not really her thing. And to give you an example, her favorite author is Doris Lessing, who is she's from what was known as Rhodesia, which is
Mhm.
now modern day Zimbabwe. A white woman who was a feminist and a communist, and she was setting her book. Well, she was writing at the time in the 1950s. Very different to a modern interpretation of Heat, to say the least.
Yeah, just a little
Just a
bit.
little. Um, but she was actually very, very positive about it. And you might be listening thinking, oh, well, it's your wife. She's never going to trash it. You've never met my wife before. If she didn't like it, she, which is good. This is healthy. If she didn't like it, she would happily say, this is not for me. I mean, she would couch it in that sort of language, but she would definitely say, I don't like this because X, Y, Z. And of course, after she read it and she really liked it, I said, "Oh, well, you've got to read this story that I wrote in it was something for an anthology because it has one of the same characters who appears briefly in the novel." And of course, because she liked the book, I was, oh, well, I've got to show her this other thing. And she read that. She said, "Nah, I don't, this, I don't understand what this story's about. This one, this wasn't for me," which is good because at least I know that when she does like something, it's an honest appraisal. But I think, and I guess this is one way to sort of segue back into the dad or the dad lit stuff is she had the impression that it was very much manly man crime fiction and explosions and ninjas and da da da.
Yeah.
And there is that element to it. But she said, "Oh, it's actually about a whole lot of other things: family, relationships, trauma, loneliness, and it's all in there." And it was an interesting eye opener for me in the sense that I thought, well, when we talk about Dadlit, and when we first started talking, you said I'm doing this podcast about Dadlit, and my initial reaction was, oh, it's you know Jack Reacher, it's that macho tough guy alpha male type of fiction. When we think of what dads read, Lee Child's obviously everywhere. I mean, I think that's true in the US. It's certainly true in the UK. I mean, there's this saying that in London, you're never 6 feet away from a rat. I think when you're on holiday in Europe, in Spain, where, British people like to holiday, you're never 3 feet away from a Lee Child paperback. They're just everywhere. And I've read one or two, um, but they don't really appeal to me. I
Yeah.
think I can see the appeal for other people, and I think, and we can get into this. There's that strong loner male character who's a tough guy and he lives by a moral code, and it's something that goes back to even he's like a modern day samurai in a way,
Yeah. A
and
Ronin.
there,
Yeah, he's a
yeah,
Ronin. Yeah.
there is a strong appeal to that, and let's be clear. I mean, a lot of, I mean, there is a strong element of that in my own book,
Hmm.
where you have these guys who are, to quote Michael Mann, I am alone, I'm not lonely.
Yeah.
They secretly are lonely. That's a spoiler. um, uh, but to sustain that for a whole book, I mean, I don't know whether that is something that is enough for me. And was talking offline. I said I've recently watched the third season of Reacher, and I did love it. I mean, it's really silly, but it's
Yeah.
good fun. Um, but I think watching a film or watching something on TV is slightly more passive. So it has different. Uh, there's different things that I want from a novel. A novel, and I maybe have this somewhat antiquated notion that a novel is almost like you get out of it what you put into it,
Yes.
and even not just as a writer, as a reader. So there should be enough meat on the bone and enough going on in a novel on different levels where you can read it, maybe even reread it, and there's always something there to get from it. Whereas I don't think that's true for films and TV, but maybe if we think about crime fiction and quote unquote dad crime fiction or dad lit that's moved, it does feel to me that it has moved in that direction of more loner alpha male type characters. I mean, I think that was always there, but if you think about what dads or people of that age used to read back in the 70s or 80s, it felt like it was a little bit more sophisticated or a little bit more idiosyncratic, at least. If you think about John MacDonald and the Travis McGee novels, someone like Elmore Leonard, who was like a dad favorite, I'd say. I mean, there's that
Yeah.
very famous or infamous story of George W. Bush being a huge Elmore Leonard fan.
Yeah.
Well, he was pictured on his ranch at Texas reading an Elmore Leonard paperback, which was it gave me very mixed feelings.
Well, there it's funny. There is particularly among um, American leaders a long history of reading westerns. I
Mm,
mean, Eisenhower read westerns. He was obsessed with pulp westerns. George W. Bush westerns as well.
that doesn't
And
surprise me at all,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, yeah. And and so obviously Leonard comes from the Western tradition and then creates his subsequent crime novels, which I happen to love. My most recent favorite, and the one that I like to comp my first novel to, my crime novel, is Maximum Bob,
Yep,
which
that's one of my
is
favorites as well.
yeah, which is obviously about a Florida, a corrupt Florida judge, and it's such a bizarre book in that it doesn't seem to go anywhere.
No, he's
It's sort of it's a cataclysm of humanity is how I would describe it. It's
that's
a bunch of strange, very vibrant, very funny, and very interesting characters running into each other in a moment in time. And I just think that's so terrific and such an interesting thing to do with a book.
it is. I mean, uh, what did you call it? A cataclysm of,
Yeah, it's a conflagration, a
yeah,
conflagration of characters
just
and
running into
mayhem.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that I mean, you could say that about a lot of his books. I think Maximum Bob might have been the first one I ever read because I discovered him around that time where Get Shorty, Out of Sight, uh, Jackie Brown,
yeah,
when Tarantino was, so we're talking mid to late 90s, and he was definitely a name that was around at the time. Obviously, his films were starting to get, they'd been adapted for a long time, but that's
yeah.
when Hollywood was really focusing on him. And I think by that time they'd cracked the code with Elmore Leonard.
Hmm.
His films. I mean, Frankenheimer did 52 Pickup, which is quite good, but I don't think it was until Get Shorty maybe where they figured out, no, he's actually a comedy writer as
Yeah,
much as he
yeah.
is a crime writer, but the characters themselves don't see themselves as funny or starring in a comedy. And that's what makes it even funnier.
Yes, yeah. Eh,
But he was definitely, sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say it all rings very true for me,
Mm,
purely because my father's was a criminal defense attorney and now he's a
oh,
probate judge.
yeah.
So I just have a lot of experience with people in the justice system
Mm,
in Maine in this case, which is in a lot of ways like the South of the North in terms of it's poor, it's rural, there's a lot of drug use, there's a lot of alcohol use, there's a lot of sort of dysfunction.
mm,
And I think Elmore Leonard does it right because a lot of criminals are not necessarily malicious in their intent. They're malicious in their actions.
right.
And to them, there's so much mental illness tied into it, and there's so much sort of dysfunction that leads to criminal behavior. And I think Elmore Leonard just really captures that and just really makes that vision accessible and sort of interesting and fun. Um, and there's a I don't know if you've seen it, HBO show called Mayor of Easttown.
Loved it. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I I was talking to a friend of mine who's a big uh, dad lit reader,
Mm,
though not a dad, and we were talking about how he had hoped that Mayor of Easttown was just going to be a story of a local sheriff dealing with the people in her community and their sort of like endless dysfunction.
mm.
And that in and of itself was more interesting to him than solving the
The
great
murder.
murder
Yeah.
of the show. And to some extent, I agreed with that. And I thought about other sort of shows and authors who have had that kind of show. And I think obviously Justified,
Mm,
which is based on Elmore Leonard's Fire in the Hole story.
yes.
And to a large extent, that's what Justified is. And I really loved Justified, and I loved City Primeval,
Mm,
and obviously Walter Goggins is now a big thing. But back then, I just knew him as Shane from The Wire,
yeah. Yeah.
and
It is
I
funny
love
to see
Shane.
this rediscovery of Walton Goggins now, 20 years after The Shield. Is, I don't know
Yeah.
where these people have been, but suddenly he's the greatest actor in the world. And,
Oh
guys
yeah.
like
I
me have
mean,
known that for years.
yeah. Like Shane played. And for those who aren't familiar, this is the Shield with
Mm,
the former commish, uh, now
Michael Chiklis.
Michael Chiklis, who goes to be the most non-commish character that he could possibly be. And there's this just great show where Goggins plays a very frail police
Mm,
officer and almost Fredo-esque. I think,
That's yeah,
for
that's
a
a good comparison. Yeah.
yeah, for it. And you talk about sort of the challenge of being an actor, like being Michael Chiklis in The Shield is just he's going to be a badass, yeah,
Mm.
a badass. But playing a frail kind of screw up and doing it in a really successful way, uh, that's sort of a person who could just screw up a piece of toast
Yeah.
is, I imagine, a very difficult thing for an actor to
No,
just play that character, and he does like a really good job with it. And that's the type of character that you find in Elmore Leonard novels.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah, because he's Shane Vendrell. He's horrible. He's racist, but he's also this tragic figure. Certainly by the end of the show, it is a very. I think The Shield actually was another big influence on my book. As was Elmore Leonard. I think I've always said Elmore Leonard was the one single biggest influence on my style. I don't know whether that's really true, but it's something I've convinced myself. And I can definitely remember reading a lot of Elmore Leonard and thinking, oh wow, that you can just that deceptively simple style where he would just
yeah.
say a thing. And I thought, oh,
Literary minimalism. Yeah,
yes. And I thought, oh wow, you can just say XYZ happened. You don't
yeah,
have to dance around, throw in some adjectives and big writerly words. You could just say the thing straight up and
yep,
just do it like that. And there's a certain style and economy and a certain coolness to that way of writing. So I think, yeah, The Shield, obviously that was set in a slightly fictionalized version of LA, but it was certainly recognizable as Los Angeles. That was also a huge influence on my book. I think the Vic Mackey character less so because he was horrible. I think it was one of those weird anti-heroes that people started to root for, but
yeah.
then
I
you
mean,
just think, well,
he's just a machine, man. He's just a
yeah,
machine for getting into trouble and out of trouble.
yeah.
That's Vic Mackey, is how I understand
I
it.
mean, even the name Vic Mackey, it's
Yeah,
like an inverted Machiavelli. He's scheming, he's horrible, but that's the beauty of the show is that you can get sucked into rooting for him because he's presented as the protagonist, I suppose. I
yeah.
think that kind of starts with Tony Soprano, maybe, where you
Oh,
have that
yeah. Almost
strong
definitely.
um, anti-hero element, and it's always very weird because you get that part of the audience that watches the show, and I mean, I don't want to tell people, oh, you're watching it wrong, or you don't get it, or. But sometimes I think, oh man, like you are totally watching this. You're watching a different show to the rest of us because
Yeah.
they want to cheer these guys on. I said, no, that's not the intention. But
No, the
again,
intention's just to see how he gets out of it.
yeah,
They bury the creator of the show. It obviously went on to make Sons of Anarchy, which I didn't
mm,
like, about the motorcycle gang. But the the underlying element is you're just he Vic Mackey in The Shield buries you in under a hole. And then you're like, man, how is Vic going to get out of this? And you can
mm.
feel it. You can feel the pressure coming down on him from every single angle. And I'm just like, man, I don't think he's going to do it this
Yeah,
time.
I think to a lesser degree, Breaking Bad was very similar. It was one of
Oh,
those
yeah,
shows that
very similar.
I was really into it at the time, but since it's finished and I know how the story ends, I've never had the desire to rewatch it because I think it's one of those shows that is really about what's going to happen next. And
Yes.
there is that element to The Shield, but I think The Shield it definitely holds up in terms of its rewatchability because there's a lot going on in
Yeah, it's
there. But I
also
think The
really
Shield's
funny. It's
yeah,
really
well, yeah,
funny.
yeah. People do forget that. It certainly the earlier seasons, some of the episodes were, and Goggins was a big part of that.
Yep.
Were almost slapstick comedy, and then like a lot of other shows, Sopranos being the big example, it gradually got darker and darker as you went further along the story with these guys.
Yep. Oh, what was I going to say? There's another show that just is so potent. in the way that it creates anxiety, and it's called Bloodlines, and it's got Coach
Oh,
Taylor
yes,
from
yeah.
and Linda Cardellini, and the other guy who plays the older brother is just one of these great
Ben
bit
Mendelsohn.
actors. Ben Mendelsohn.
He's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
Australian actor.
He's
Yeah.
so
Mendo.
good. He's so good. And that show would create such anxiety in me
Mm.
that I would have to turn it off because the way you just follow these people and you're just like, man, yeah, I could see that happening to that guy and that being very stressful.
Yeah, because there was the brother who worked on the boats or something, and
Yes.
he was constantly screwing up.
Yeah, constant. Oh, jeez. You just know there's always one in every family.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
that's another podcast.
But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of good TV. I think it's right to say that there's a TV crime renaissance in the past 20 years. It's just had
Mm.
spectacular television. So this is the question: when is the literary crime renaissance coming? When are we in the dad lit community gonna get the new hot literary crime, and who do you think it's going to come from, other than yourself, obviously?
Well, you beat me to it. Dark and dark neon and dirt out now.
Yeah,
Um, I like the way you segued that because I thought about, and we talked about, well, what's going on with crime fiction and the sense that a lot of the big stuff like the Jack Reacher, I don't want to always pick on Jack Reacher, but
yeah.
I seem to do it. But I think Lee Child will be okay. He doesn't need my blessing or approval.
Yes.
Um, it is weird that as television has got more sophisticated in its storytelling, it almost seems to a degree that a lot of the big crime fiction authors or what is the most popular almost seems to have not dumbed down, become very streamlined into that alpha male type of story. Um, I don't know. I mean, people are always saying that, well, men don't read anymore. Men are too busy, mowing the lawn or playing Call of Duty or hammering nails into pieces of wood or whatever, whatever that stereotypical
Yeah.
image of the dad is. And I think that's another part of it. You have this, I mean, you've got young kids, so you're probably familiar with Peppa Pig.
Yes.
I
Oh,
mean, the dad,
Georgie.
yeah,
Oh, Georgie. I do. I do a Peppa Pig dad impression. For my daughter. Oh, Georgie. I'm I'm Dirty Pig.
that's pretty good. Um, I remember when I was like when my daughter was still a baby being carried. I spoke to another dad whose kids are slightly older, and he said, "Oh, you're gonna watch Peppa Pig. Just take my word for it." And he said, and he told me how bad the dad character was. I thought, I don't know how bad it can be. It's just a cartoon. But when I finally saw, I mean, he's just an imbecile. It almost reminded me of do you remember that show Home Improvement with
Yes,
Tim
yes,
the
with
Tool
Tim
Man
Allen.
Taylor? Yeah,
Yes.
and he was just this grunting idiot who would just he knew everything about power tools but had zero emotional intelligence, and it was just that stereotypical lunkhead dad character.
Yes.
And I think I don't know, this whole story that men aren't reading anymore. So maybe the case has been that publishers or whoever have just thought, right, well, we've got to make books for aimed at dads or men, the most men focused dad manly type thing available. And I just don't think that's true. I mean, there's all types of dads,
Yeah.
bookish dads, hipster dads, dads who read books but can also fix an engine, whatever the case may be. So I think it's there is an audience for dads or men in general that want more from a book. I think it can have those elements of action and adventure, but it can also have some literary chops, style, a bit more. in terms of emotional stakes and commentary about the wider world or whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
it's not to say that these books aren't being written. I mean, you and I both know that there's great crime fiction authors or just authors in general writing books that you would think, okay, this is aimed at a male audience. But when you think of the big names, um, they're not really they're not really there yet. Um,
So this is a thing that I think is really interesting because you and I travel in the same X circles,
mm,
and I think one of the challenges is that male interiority, so the internal thinking of the male mind, I think you and I can both agree is imperfect. We're imperfect, but
I
it
have
is
no idea what you're talking about.
well,
No.
what a man thinks about at any given moment and what he might record as a
Mm,
character is not necessarily going to be attractive to a female audience. So,
mm,
a character who's, kind of like thinking about an attractive woman he's seen on the street or thinking about, uh, trying to work his way into or making a decision and the sort of calculated versus emotional areas that drive that in a person, I think it's very unattractive to female audiences, right? I think of, for example, one of the great moments in crime fiction, which is the Blonde's speech by Philip Marlowe in I want to say it's either The Big Sleep or Farewell, My Lovely. Well, anyway, Philip Marlowe has this whole internal dialogue with himself or monologue with himself where he thinks about the different kinds of blondes. And
mm.
he's very misogynistic and very critical. And it gives you this terrific, very sort of funny, uh, interesting, and really almost poetic description of what's going on in this character's mind. And I think about putting it in any book today,
Mm.
and I would immediately turn people off. But in that classic sense, in that 30s, 1940s, 1950s, uh, he would Raymond Chandler didn't blink an eye thinking about it. He's like,
Mm.
oh, this is a fun thing to say about Los Angeles and to say about women who are blonde in Los Angeles at this particular time. And I wonder if that can survive in, contemporary publishing where you want to market to everybody and you want to sell a lot of books, like Lee Child sells a lot of books.
Yeah.
And if that sort of unlikable, very how do you just an unlikable character in that way can emerge and be successful in contemporary literature.
I think you can still write unlikable characters. I think they don't have to be likable. They just have to be fascinating in some
Yeah.
way. Um, I don't know. Uh, I'm actually not a huge fan of Raymond Chandler.
Oh,
I don't know.
really?
I don't know whether that's going to get me thrown off the podcast
Ultimate,
immediately.
one of the great dad lit authors.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where obviously he was writing well before my time,
Yeah.
and it was one of those. He's one of those authors that I only really discovered after I discovered everything else that he clearly influenced.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the sort of overwrought language and the similes and so forth that, by the time I came to him, I thought, oh, this is just I I don't know. That's the story I tell myself. Maybe I just don't like Raymond Chandler. And it's as simple as that. And not everyone has to like everything, but there is something
This is
about
very true.
there's just something about the language and I used to work with a guy who I didn't particularly like, and he was obsessed with Raymond Chandler, so that might be part of it. And he's one of these guys who,
Tragic.
yeah, and he
Tragic.
used to drink gimlets at the bar, and he was, oh God, he was fucking annoying. So that's probably a part of it too. I mean, I like Dashiell Hammett, who, again,
Yes.
probably not the most politically correct character. If you think about Red Harvest and the Continental Op, has
Yep.
some very outdated views of the female species, shall we say?
Yes.
But again, I think there's room for characters like that, but oh yeah, it's tricky. I don't want to get into this whole, oh, well, you can't say this anymore and you can't say that anymore, because I think most of that is bullshit, quite frankly. I
No,
think
I think it
you can
comes down
say
to just
anything.
is it attractive to a
Hmm,
reader? I don't say you can't say it. You can obviously say it. It's a question of is it attractive to a reader and can a publisher or can an author sell it?
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I wonder about some of this stuff. I think there's certain parts of my book and some of the language and so forth is decidedly un-PC, but my pushback on that, I mean, I didn't get any pushback from the
Yeah.
publisher or anyone, but I assume because they were smart enough to realize, no, well, if you're writing a book set in Los Angeles with criminals, corrupt police officers, or whatever the case may be, this is how these people talk. This is how they think. So you just have to roll with it and accept it. But I think to go back to that thing about you know targeting certain parts of the audience, I spoke to someone once, who rather he spoke to a group of us at Columbia University, and he is now a very high-ranking individual at Simon and Schuster, I believe. Um, and he said, look, since the beginning of time, writers have either written for a male audience or a female audience, and that's it. So if you think of your favorite writer, they either write for men or they write for women. And my initial reaction was, no, that can't be true. But then I stopped and thought, hmm, I think if you just throw out some author names, you know, are they writing for men or are they writing for women? You could probably come up with answers very quickly. Raymond
Yeah.
Chandler, men, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, Sally Rooney, women. Um,
Mhm.
although I don't even know if that's true. I've never actually read Sally Rooney, but
Neither have I.
maybe this
It's
comes
not
down to
gonna.
marketing. But then I can
Yeah.
think of a lot of like someone like Haruki Murakami. From what I can tell, his audience seems to be pretty split between men and women. Maybe slightly more um, men than women. But again, I'm not sure. Someone like Salman Rushdie seems to have a pretty, evenly split audience
Yeah.
between men and women. So I think there's always exceptions. I think, and my wife said this to me about my book. She said, well, maybe the reason why she liked it so much is because I didn't go into it thinking I want to write this book for a targeted audience. I just wanted to write the book that I wanted to write
Yeah.
and put everything that I wanted to put in there. And I think I have to give credit to Shotgun Honey, the publisher, that they never, because if you read it, you'll think, I mean, in one sense, it's very obviously very much indebted to Heat in a lot of ways with the basic scaffolding of the plot. But then it does have these weird little tangents and idiosyncrasies. I like to think so anyway, where you think, well, what is that doing in there? Um,
Not
and
enough of that in books, by the way.
well, no, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think, but I will say well, not criticism, it was just an observation, shall we say, that my wife had was, oh, a lot of these characters, for someone who's a policeman in Los Angeles or whatever, they just sound like you. Their thought process is the same as you. Even some of the vernacular or the insults that they use are something that you'd say, someone who cut you off in traffic or whatever. Um, and so I mean, you do. I think probably a lot of writers do worry that, oh, this character is just a mouthpiece for some part of my personality.
Yeah.
But then the flip side is, well, if you're not giving them some personality, then what are you doing? You're
Yeah.
just, writing cookie cutter type of fiction, and God knows the world doesn't need any more of that, especially with this AI. stuff
Ugh,
going
ugh.
on at the moment. I mean, pretty soon you have a toaster that can write books like that. So what, why do humans have to do it?
Yep.
So, my solution is just make it weirder, make it more idiosyncratic, make it your own. Um, and I think, going back to the whole dad thing, I mean, dads, you have that stereotypical image of the idiot dad, the Tim the Toolman Taylor, Peppa Pig's dad, these, rather silly men. But I don't think that's true at all. I think uh, men are as complicated as anyone else. I think when you think of what gets marketed as chick lit, I mean, that's super reductive when it comes to, well, this is what
Yeah.
women like. They just want a rich boyfriend. They want to go shopping, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. I mean, I mean, pretty much all the women I know just turn their nose up at that junk.
Hmm.
So I think it's a very similar thing, for a lot of that dad lit. It's they're trying to target an audience, and I think that they're missing out on a bigger one as a result. I think there's so much more going on with with people and with men and with
Yeah.
dads that that they don't really focus on.
Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was getting on my soapbox a bit, but
Yes. No,
no,
that's fine.
I was talking to my wife about this earlier, um, and she was saying, look, you've had the book out for about a week, 10 days now, and she's actually she's now my unofficial publicist and agent ever since she read the book and she loved it and she's pushing it on all her friends and people that she's worked with and the strange thing about this because I don't necessarily advertise the fact that I'm a writer in my real life. I've got other things going on and so on. But now that people know I have a book out, you get all these people coming out of the woodwork saying, "Oh, this sounds interesting." And it's sometimes it's people I haven't heard from in years because the beauty of the internet is everyone's always connected even when they aren't, and they hear about these things. And I thought, oh, now I think about it, yeah, this is the kind of thing that this guy, who's 47 years old and he's a sound engineer and he lives here, and when he's not going to read Jack Reacher, that's just not his thing at all. Um, so I think people will have to write more interesting and complicated and complex books. I don't mean complex in terms of big words and so forth. I just mean
Yeah.
more emotionally complex and more interesting characters. Um, and again, yeah, especially with AI able to churn out stuff. I mean,
Plots. Yeah.
yeah, why bother?
Yeah.
Just make it your own, make it as personal, make it as strange as you can.
Hmm.
I think people will
Well,
really respond to that.
yeah. I think, well, we've reached our hour, and I think make it as strange as you can. It's
Yeah.
great advice.
Yeah.
So, so Thomas, thank you again. Do you want to plug? You want to give the final word? Plug Neon Dark or Dark Neon and Dirt.
Dark Neon and Dirt. Yeah,
Yes.
it is out. It's been out for about 10 days now, I think. It's a heist crime novel. Yeah, go out and check it out if you like the sound of this. And keep it dad.
Keep it dad. Yes, thank you again, Thomas. And this has been the Dad Lit Pod. I hope you enjoyed it.